In Matthew chapter 15 from verse 1 to 9, we see that Christ is saying that if you don't keep the commandments, you are worshiping in vain. We read about people who go to the worship centers and they worship and they scream and they praise but Christ was saying in Matthew chapter 15 verse 1 to 9 that if you're not keeping God's commandment, you're worshiping in vain. Let's take a look. Let's read it and see what it says. Matthew chapter 9, chapter 15, verse 1 to 9.
Then came to Jesus scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, Why do thy disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. But he answered and said unto them, Why do ye also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? For God commanded, saying, Honor thy father and mother. And he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, Whosoever shall say to his father or his mother, It is a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, and honor not his father or his mother, he shall be free. Thus have ye made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition. Ye hypocrites, well did Esaias prophesy of you, saying, This people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honored me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. And he called.
All right, so you can see that you can go to church all you want. You can go to church every day. You can pray every day. But if you are not keeping the commandments in the scriptures, you're wasting your time. You just saw that these people, Christ is talking about people that they are worshiping God, but they've laid aside his commandments. They took his laws and his commandments and they put it aside, and they are now following for doctrines the commandments of men. Following for doctrines the commandments of men. And when you do that, you are worshiping in vain. And that's what most people are doing today. So you cannot worship our Creator without keeping his commandment. If you're not keeping his commandment, you're wasting your time. In First John chapter 2 verse 3 and verse 4, it says that the only way we're going to know that we know him is if we keep his commandment. If somebody claims to know God but doesn't keep his commandment, that person is a liar and there's no truth in that person. And also in First John chapter 5 from verse 2, we see what the love of God is. If we claim that we love God, then we should keep his commandment. John chapter 14 verse 15 and verse 16, Christ said, if you love me, keep my commandment, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you a helper that will reveal the truth to you. So you can clearly see that anyone who is worshiping God or claiming to worship God, but they are not keeping his commandment, that person is wasting their time. That person is worshiping in vain, according to what Christ said, because he made it clear in Matthew chapter 5 verse 17 to verse 19 that we must keep every single law, that he did not come to abolish it, that we are supposed to keep it. In Matthew chapter 23 from verse 1 to 3, he commanded his disciples and the multitude listening to him, he commanded them to keep every single law of Moses. Read these things for yourself. Read it for yourself. It's right there. So the fact is that we need to keep his commandment, and if you are not keeping his commandment, you are worshiping him in vain. He does not recognize your worship. He will not recognize your prayers. Just like it says in Proverbs chapter 28 verse 9 says that he that turns his ear from hearing the law, their prayer is an abomination. Of the prayer of anyone that refuses to hear the law, that their prayer is an abomination. But also Romans chapter 2 verse 13 makes it very clear that not the hearers of the law are just, but the doers of the law will be justified. Meaning that it's those that keep the law They are the ones that will be justified on the judgment day. Christ also said in Revelation chapter 22 verse 14 that those who keep the commandment, they are the ones that will be allowed to come into the kingdom of heaven. You know, I can sit here and go on and on and on and on and on, but I highly recommend that you meditate on the book for yourself, read it for yourself. And by the way, where do you find his laws? You find it in the book of Leviticus, in the book of Numbers, in the book of Deuteronomy, in the book of Exodus. That is where you find the book of the law. That's where you find all the commandments that our Heavenly Father wants us to keep. And as Christ said, that those who will be allowed into the kingdom of heaven are those that are keeping his commandments. So I really encourage you to start studying from the beginning. You can't understand the end of the book if you ignore the beginning. You cannot understand the New Testament if you don't read the Old Testament. You have to start reading from the beginning. Read and meditate on the book of his law like he commanded us to do in Psalms chapter 1 verse 3, chapter 1 verse 1 to 3, and in Joshua chapter 1 verse 7 and verse 8. You know, there's a commandment there to meditate on the book of his laws day and night, and you find his laws in the book of Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Exodus. You know, so this is very important that we make sure that we are not worshiping in vain. Because if you are not keeping his commandment, like he said in Matthew chapter 15, verse 1 to 9, if you're not keeping his commandment, you are worshiping in vain. And he does not and will not recognize your worship. Just like he says in Proverbs chapter 28, verse 9, that the prayers of anyone that turns their ears away from hearing the law, their prayers is an abomination. Their prayer cannot get to heaven. It's an abomination. He cannot turn his face to you because you're ignoring his law. But also, it's not just hearing the law, like Romans says. It's actually doing what the book of the law says. So please, make sure that you are not worshiping him in vain. Make sure that you're keeping his commandments, because as we were told in Revelation chapter 22, verse 14, those who will be allowed into the kingdom of heaven are those that are keeping his commandment.